Today we are going to be working on the Bosozoku car again, and we are going to try and attempt to finish this rear trunk, or I guess start it. We're going to pull it off, we're going to unbolt it, we're going to flip it around, we're going to take away some of the inner skin. We're going to take this thick piece of metal, we're going to cut it out in about this shape, and that way once we tack weld that up inside here, it's going to help pinch that in there and hopefully distribute some of the forces from the big wing around this so it doesn't crack any of the paint once it's all finished. So we're going to do that. We're also going to completely strip all this in front, all this in the back here. Possibly we're going to try and cap off the ends, sand those down a little bit, fiberglass that. We may try and do some of the kitty hair work on here to fill that in, fill this in. From there, we are going to do the epoxy primer, then the 2K. So main goal is to basically get the trunk pretty much finished. It's still gonna need to be blocked along with the sides and everything, but I figured taking this thing off will allow us to get to all of this much easier without the possibility of damaging the window or anything else, and then that way we'll leave this off. Once we do the quarters, we'll be able to get inside there. With the epoxy primer, it really is only going to work from keeping any moisture away from the metal as long as it has a really good seal. And so if we are able to paint in the jam all the way to where the seal is, it'll be much better than if we just paint it on top of here as if we didn't remove the trunk. So this is going to be the better way, faster way. We're just hoping that once we put the trunk back on, we can try and align it just as good as it is now. So we're gonna try and take some precautions to do that. But we're gonna pull this thing off. It should be pretty easy, and we're gonna start sanding this thing down. Okay, so now that we have the trunk off of the car, it'll be very easy to now put in our little metal braces. We are going to try and cut out as little of this structure as possible. Thankfully, the factory inner skin is actually has a little bit of a space between the top skin, and so we will probably try and be able to kind of fit it in there without cutting too much of this away. I was thinking that we were just going to cut the whole thing out and then just kind of tack weld it up and try and you know, make it not so floppy. I don't think it would be floppy at all. It just, I don't know. I don't know if we'll be able to stick it in there, but I think we might. Well, maybe not. I don't know. Now that we have the trunk off, we can go ahead and start welding in our support pieces here. First, we're going to have to cut the pieces out of the steel, fit it up here, and we're going to try and weld it. We're not going to be completely welding everything, maybe like just like a stitch weld so it's strong, but we don't really want too much of warping on the top side. So we're going to do that first thing, and then once that's done, everything's cleaned up here, maybe we'll body work underneath here. Good thing we took this thing off because there's a lot of excess Bondo from the old wing all inside here, and we still have to take off all of this excess resin up top here. And then once that's done, and this is all prepped, we can flip it over and start prepping and taking off all of the excess material that's on the top side as well, and go from there. But this is pretty exciting. Taking the panels off the car is always very nice. I remember when I took off the doors, even getting them realigned was kind of a pain in the ass. It is so worth it to take them off. It is so much easier to work on it. Even with this thing, you know, being in a better position, taking it off and working on the underside, good move, I think. So now we have both of these tacked up, and I know we only have a few tacks, whatever, 5 tacks on each one. I know it's probably not super sturdy, but the main point of these things is basically to act as a giant washer and to pinch it in between the top skin and this, and then obviously this is going to distribute the forces over a bigger area, just so that way, you know, because it's so big, and when we do drive it on the road with it, it is probably going to create some sort of drag, and we just wanted to kind of, you know, make it a little bit more safe. I'm not sure exactly how we would want to do this. Maybe if we, you know, cut more out and then, you know, were to weld up more, it'd probably be a little bit better. I just didn't want to weld it to the top skin because there's a little bit of a gap, but I know that once we put a nut on there, it's going to be pinching this and it's going to bring it closer. So I'm not sure if I really want to do that. I don't think it's a big deal that it's only tacked up. I think as long as it doesn't really move around, we'll be okay. But as for drilling the holes, I know we didn't drill the holes in these yet, and that's because I want the holes to be exactly the same as the ones that are on the top. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over, we'll do a punch, and then from there we'll drill a hole, like a small one, so that way we're not putting a ton of force going this way, and then we'll come from this side where we can exert more force downwards and do the bigger size drill bit. And then from there, obviously, you know, now we have a nice flat area to put, you know, big washer from there, the nut and everything, whereas before, on areas like this and this, it was pretty much, I don't know what we would really want to do. We would have to do some sort of rubber grommet or something that could take a different shape to kind of, you know, get that tight on there. So I think this is a better way. I'm sure there's a better way to do it than this, but this will get the job done. And even though it doesn't look the prettiest, it doesn't really matter all that much because it's all going to be covered by the factory mat anyways, because we're going to trim off the excess stud that's going to come through here. We're going to make it so we have just a few threads extra from what we need, and from there it'll look nice and factory once we open the trunk. And so I think it'll be pretty clean and it'll work about as good as we want it to. So as you can see, the trunk has come a long way since you guys have seen it, mostly because I'm trying to stray away from showing a lot of the sanding process and, you know, filler process because it's boring and you guys have seen plenty of it. Not a whole lot has changed, but since you've last seen it, we have not only done a bunch of filler work, a bunch of blocking work. We did primer this because it is going to be painted black at some point. All of the jams and everything is going to be painted black, I think. Maybe one of the other colors that we're using, but that's why I did primer this. So now we're going to flip this over and we are going to film the epoxy primer and the primer on the top side. Just because I figured that'd be a little bit more entertaining. So this is already dried overnight. This is pretty much ready. We're not going to do anything to this right now. We're going to flip it over and show you what we've done. So as you can see, we have filler on each and every side. We have since fiberglass capped each of the edges. We sanded it down about 1/8 of an inch to clearance for the additional filler and fiberglass. So this should be relatively decently gapped once we throw it back on the car. Everything else is obviously sanded. This is blocked down here. Not 100%. These surfaces here are not blocked 100%. Everything has been blocked, kind of, but not 100% because we want to get the primer on here. We're going to get some super, super high build primer hopefully soon. But when we get that, we are going to do it only on the surfaces that are going to be really shown. So that's why we can do it once it's all back together. So we'll get everything super close, throw everything back together, get this thing back on there once all of that is to the same stage as this will be by the end of today. And then from there, we can do the super high build primer. Then if we do need more filler, then we will do that. But with the really high build primer, it is unlikely that we'll need a ton of filler after this whole process. This is kind of just getting the majority of the work out of the way. From there, moving on and kind of just starting to get some things done. So pretty exciting. We're gonna get a major part of the rear end of the car pretty much in one of the final stages and ready for final blocking and final paint prep. Even though this trunk has taken us way longer than I expected, I think it turned out a little bit better than I expected. It's still going to need a ton of work, don't get me wrong. There's a bunch of pits that we need to fill in that we probably should have done before we ever did any sort of initial primer, but I just kind of wanted to do this so I could move on and kind of be happy with where I'm at right here. This also kind of tells me a little bit of what I need to do for future panels that we're going to be prepping for the primer. So this kind of helped me out a lot, and so I learned a little bit from this, but I'm pretty happy with where it's at right now. I don't think it needs a ton more work. Obviously, the entire thing pretty much needs to be coated with a light layer of the filler. From there, it needs to be blocked and straightened out completely straight, and then we could do some final primer and then obviously blocking that. Anyways, guys, this is where I'm gonna end it for today. If you guys are interested in helping out the channel and the progression of this build, go ahead and pick yourself up some merchandise. It is highly appreciated. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed today's video, and peace out.